Right now, in a luxury steakhouse in Chicago, a billionaire is raising $500 worth of champagne. He's toasting his mistress, planning his divorce, celebrating his freedom. He has no idea that 2 hours ago his pregnant wife signed documents that just transferred his entire fortune into her name. $340 million. Gone. With a single signature he never bothered to read. He thinks she's home, powerless, waiting. He thinks she signed a prenup that left her with nothing. He thinks he's untouchable. He's wrong. And in exactly 47 minutes, when his credit card gets declined in front of his mistress in a restaurant full of Chicago's elite, he's going to find out just how wrong he was. This is the true story of how the most dangerous weapon in any marriage isn't money or power. It's a woman nobody's paying attention to. Stay with me, because what happens next will shock you. They say timing is everything. He's toasting to a future he'll never have, because 2 hours ago, I took it all away. And he doesn't know it yet. The luxury steakhouse glows with soft amber light. David Harrison sits in a private dining room, his 42-year-old face illuminated by candlelight and arrogance. Across from him, Amber Sinclair leans forward in a blood-red dress that costs more than most people's monthly rent. Her dark hair cascades over one bare shoulder as she watches him with predatory patience. David raises a bottle of Dom Perignon Rosé. $500 worth of champagne catches the light like liquid gold. "To our future, baby," he says, his voice thick with confidence. "In 2 weeks, I'm filing for divorce. Then it's just you and me." Amber's perfectly painted lips curve into a smile. "Finally," she purrs. "When are you leaving her?" "Next month. I've already got the divorce papers drawn up." He pours champagne into crystal flutes, the bubbles rising like his inflated sense of control. "She's got nothing. I made sure of it." They clink glasses. The sound rings out like a bell tolling for everything he's about to lose. 2 hours earlier, downtown courthouse. Judge Patricia Morrison's chambers are nothing like the steakhouse's soft elegance. Here, everything is harsh, fluorescent light and legal consequence. I sit at a mahogany conference table, 7 months pregnant, my belly pressing against the edge. My hand shakes as I sign the final document. Robert Thorne stands beside me, silver-haired and sharp-eyed. He's 58 years old and has spent 30 of those years destroying men exactly like my husband. "It's done, Mrs. Harrison," he says quietly. He has no idea. Judge Morrison brings her gavel down. Emergency motion granted. All asset transfers as of Friday 3:47 p.m. are frozen. Petitioner is granted temporary emergency control of marital assets. The timestamp reads 4:47 p.m. I stand, documents clutched to my chest. My daughter kicks inside me, a flutter of life that reminds me why I'm doing this, why I had to become someone I never thought I'd be. But let me back up. Let me tell you how a woman who once believed in fairy tale love became the architect of a billionaire's downfall. My name is Jennifer Parker Harrison. Most people call me Jen. I'm 38 years old, 7 months pregnant, and until very recently, I was invisible in my own marriage. I wake at 5:30 every morning. The bed is always empty beside me. David leaves for the gym before dawn, back when the city is still dark and quiet. I make his protein smoothie, though he rarely drinks it. I lay out his suit, though he never thanks me. I manage the household staff via text message, coordinating cleaners and cooks, and the woman who waters our indoor plants. My job is to make David Harrison's life effortless. To be the perfect wife, the perfect hostess, the perfect invisible support system for a man who sees me as furniture that occasionally speaks. This morning is like every other. I stand in our kitchen, all marble and stainless steel, and watch Chicago's skyline emerge from the darkness. Lake Michigan stretches beyond the windows like a sheet of hammered pewter. Our condo is in the Gold Coast, 47th floor, 6,000 square feet of carefully curated luxury. Everything here is beautiful and cold. I touch my belly, feeling the baby move. She's active this morning, doing somersaults against my ribs. I whisper to her, "Good morning, little one." It's the only conversation I'll have all day that feels real. David comes home at 7. His hair is still damp from the gym shower. He smells like expensive cologne and the lavender-scented towels they provide in the executive locker room. He doesn't kiss me. Hasn't in months. Maybe longer. Morning, sir, he says, scrolling through his phone as he pours coffee. Good morning, I reply. How was your workout? Fine. He doesn't look up. I've got the investor meeting at 9. Don't wait up tonight. It'll run late. It won't run late. It never does. But I know where he'll be instead. This is marriage, I think. This careful dance of polite lies and emotional distance. This is what 8 years has reduced us to. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. Let me show you the moment everything shattered. The moment I stopped being the invisible wife and started becoming something else entirely. 7 months ago, I was in the bathroom, staring at a plastic stick with 2 blue lines. My hands shook so hard I nearly dropped it. Pregnant. After 8 years of marriage, after David had made it clear children weren't on the timeline yet, I was pregnant. Part of me felt pure joy, a fierce, primal excitement at the life growing inside me. But a bigger part felt dread, cold and heavy in my stomach. How do you tell a man who sees you as an employee that you're carrying his child? I planned it carefully, made a reservation at Luciano's, the upscale Italian restaurant where David had proposed 8 years ago. I bought his favorite wine, a $400 Bordeaux. I couldn't drink it, of course, but he wouldn't notice. I wore the dress from our honeymoon, navy blue silk that barely fit over my new curves. I put the pregnancy test in a gift box wrapped in silver paper. David arrived 40 minutes late. He was on his phone talking about leverage ratios and Chicago property values. He sat down without looking at me, still on the call. I watched him for 5 minutes, 7 minutes, 10, while he discussed closing dates and earnest money deposits with someone who wasn't his pregnant wife. Finally, he hung up. What? He said, noticing my expression. David, I need to tell you something. He sighed, the sound of a busy man being interrupted. Can it wait? I've got an early call with the Tokyo office tomorrow. I slid the gift box across the white tablecloth. My heart hammered against my ribs. It can't wait. He opened it without ceremony, pulled out the pregnancy test, stared at it for what felt like an eternity. Then he said, when? Not, are you happy? Not, how do you feel? Just when, like I was giving him a project deadline. November, I whispered. He picked up the wine list, his eyes already distant, calculating. Okay, good timing actually. Tax benefits kick in and it'll look good for the investor meeting. We should announce it in the trades. Good for the Harrison Properties brand. He paused, finally looked at me. We can do a photo shoot. You, me, the bump. Very family-oriented. The board will love it. No hug, no kiss, no joy, just brand management. I sat there in my honeymoon dress, in the restaurant where he'd once promised to love me forever, and felt something inside me die. Not love exactly. Love had been dying by degrees for years. This was hope. The last fragile thread of hope that maybe, somehow, this baby would bring us back together. Instead, he turned our child into a tax write-off and a public relations opportunity. I went to the bathroom and cried into expensive paper towels. When I came back, David was on his phone again. He'd ordered for both of us without asking what I wanted. That night, I lay in bed and felt the first flutter of movement. A tiny kick, like a butterfly's wing against the inside of my ribs. I put my hand on my belly and made a silent promise. I will protect you. No matter what it takes. I didn't know then what it would take. I didn't know I'd become someone capable of systematic deception, of cold calculation, of using the law itself as a weapon. I didn't know I was capable of destroying the man I'd once loved. But I was about to find out. 3 months into my pregnancy, I discovered the truth on a Tuesday morning while doing laundry. It's funny how life-changing moments can be so mundane. Not dramatic confrontations or planned revelations. Just a phone buzzing on a marble countertop while you're sorting dress shirts into dry cleaning piles. David's phone. He'd left it behind when he rushed out for an early meeting. It buzzed once, twice, 3 times. I ignored it. His assistant probably, calling about a forgotten document. Then I saw the preview message on the lock screen. Last night was insane. When can we do the thing with the handcuffs again? Missing you already. There was a thumbnail image. A woman in black lingerie. My hands went numb. The shirt I was holding fell to the floor. The phone buzzed again and the image downloaded fully. A woman on a hotel bed, naked except for lace. Her face turned toward the camera in a sultry smile. Young, beautiful, confident. Everything I felt I wasn't anymore. I dropped the phone like it had burned me. It hit the marble floor, and the screen shattered into a spiderweb of cracks. For maybe 30 seconds, I couldn't breathe. My lungs refused to expand. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. The baby kicked, hard and insistent, as if sensing my distress. Then my body betrayed me completely. My belly cramped, tightening like a fist. Braxton Hicks contractions I knew from my pregnancy books. Practice contractions. But these felt real, painful, terrifying. I stumbled to the couch, gasping. The room spun. I fumbled for my own phone with shaking hands and called the one person I trusted. "Dr. Williams," I managed. "Maggie, I can't breathe." "Jennifer, what's wrong?" "I'm the baby. I can't." "I'm sending an ambulance. Stay on the line with me." The next hour blurred into sirens and strangers' hands in the cold efficiency of emergency medicine. They loaded me onto a gurney, put monitors on my belly, took my blood pressure, and made concerned sounds. 180 over 110, a paramedic said. "That's dangerously high." At the hospital, Dr. Margaret Williams appeared in my curtained ER bay. She was 47, with kind eyes and capable hands. She'd been my OBGYN for 5 years, through 2 miscarriages and now this pregnancy. She knew me well enough to know something was very wrong. She cleared the room of nurses and pulled the curtain shut. "Jennifer, the baby's fine. Heart rate is good, no signs of distress, but your blood pressure could cause a stroke or premature labor." "What happened?" I told her. About the text message, the photo, the shattering realization that my husband was cheating on me while I carried his child. Maggie's expression went from concerned to furious. She sat on the edge of my bed and took my hand. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know," I whispered. "I have nothing, Maggie. No job, no money of my own. We have a prenup. I signed it when I was 25 and stupid and in love." "What does it say?" "If I leave, I get $50,000. That's it. How do I raise a baby on that?" The words hung in the sterile air between us. I felt like I was drowning, trapped beneath the surface of my own life with no way up. "First, you survive," Maggie said quietly. "Then we make a plan." They kept me for observation. 6 hours of monitors and IV fluids and medical quiet. David never came, never even called. When I checked my phone, I had one text from him. "Heard you're at the hospital. Hope you're okay. Stuck in meetings all day. See you tonight. Hope you're okay." Like I'd mentioned a headache, not an emergency, I stared at that message for a long time. At the casual dismissal, the complete lack of concern. I was having a medical crisis with his child, and he couldn't be bothered to cancel a meeting. That night, I went home to our empty auto and did something I'd never done before. I went into David's home office and opened his safe. The combination was our wedding anniversary. June 15th, 2016, 6/15/16. He'd never bothered to change it. Probably didn't think I'd ever have reason to open it. Inside were documents, deeds, investment portfolios, and our prenuptial agreement, bound in dark leather like a legal death sentence. I'd signed it the week before our wedding. David's lawyers had presented it as a formality, standard protection for a man of his wealth. I was 25, in love, and convinced that love was enough. I'd barely read it before signing. Now at 38 and 7 months pregnant, I read every word. Article 4 laid out asset division in brutal clarity. Years 0 through 5, I'd receive $50,000. Years 6 through 10, $500,000. Years 10 and above, $2 million. We were in year 8. I'd get $500,000 if we divorced. It sounded like a lot. Until I factored in Chicago rents, childcare, health insurance, legal fees, maybe 2 years of survival if I was careful. Then what? All property, businesses, and investments remained David's sole property. Child support was capped at $2,500 per month. I sat in his leather chair, one hand on my belly, and felt the weight of my choices crushing down. I'd given up my accounting career to be his wife. I'd built my entire life around supporting his success. And now I was trapped. Unless my accountant brain Dormant for 8 years, flickered to life. I kept reading, past the asset division, past the custody language, into the addendums and clauses and footnotes that lawyers bury in the back of documents. Page 63, Article 12, Special Provisions for Protection of Heirs. My eyes caught on subsection C. I read it once, then again, my heart starting to pound for an entirely different reason: infidelity during gestation. I read the clause 3 times, my hands shaking, my mind racing through implications and possibilities. This was it. This was my weapon. But first I needed proof, undeniable, documented, ironclad proof. I pulled out my phone and searched for private investigators in Chicago. Found one with good reviews, ex-Chicago PD. His name was Robert Costa. Over the next 2 weeks, I withdrew $5,000 in cash. 200 here, 300 there, from the household grocery budget. David never noticed. He never looked at the household accounts, considered it beneath him. I hid the money in a tampon box under the bathroom sink. David would never look there. Then I met Costa in a suburban diner 30 minutes from our neighborhood. I wore sunglasses and a hoodie, felt ridiculous and desperate and determined. "What do you need, ma'am?" Costa asked. He was in his 50s, gruff and direct. I slid the envelope of cash across the Formica table. "My husband. I need proof of everything. Where he goes, who he's with, how much he spends. What are you planning to do with the information?" "I don't know yet," I said. It was the truth. But I need ammunition. Costa gave me 2 weeks of surveillance, so what he found was worse than I'd imagined. Photos of David and a woman at Gibson's Steakhouse, holding hands across the table. Photos of them entering the Peninsula Hotel at 2:30 in the afternoon, when David had told me he had investor meetings. Photos of his hand on her ass in a parking garage. Photos of them kissing in his car. Her name was Amber Sinclair, 31 years old, luxury real estate agent at Elite Realty Partners. Beautiful in that sharp, polished way that made me feel frumpy and obsolete. The receipts Costa found were even more damning. Tiffany & Company, $47,000 for a diamond tennis bracelet. Birkin bag, $35,000. Louboutin shopping spree, $12,000. A Porsche Cayenne lease registered to one of David's hidden LLCs, $1,800 per month. Costa tallied it all up, $205,000 spent on his mistress in the past year alone. The final photo Costa delivered was the one that changed everything. David and Amber in bed together, both sleeping, tangled in hotel sheets, taken through a hotel window with a telephoto lens. I stared at that photo for a long time, at my husband's face, peaceful and satisfied in a way I'd never seen at home, at the woman beside him who got his laughter, his attention, his love. Something inside me went very cold and very quiet. I wasn't sad anymore. I was done being sad. I was angry. The kind of anger that doesn't scream or break things. The kind that plans and calculates and waits for the perfect moment to strike. But first, I needed to understand the legal landscape. I needed to know if the clause on page 63 could actually work. I met with a basic divorce attorney first. His office overlooked Lake Michigan, all glass and chrome and expensive views. He listened to my story with practiced sympathy. "I'm sorry you're going through this, Mrs. Harrison," he said when I finished, "but Illinois is a no-fault state. Infidelity doesn't factor into asset division." "What about the prenup?" I showed him the document. He flipped through it, paused on the terms. "You'd receive $500,000, plus $2,500 a month in child support." "What about custody?" His expression shifted, became more careful. "Your husband has significant resources. He could argue he provides better stability, better opportunities for the child. Best case scenario, you get 50-50 custody. Worst case, he gets primary and you get weekends." The room tilted. "He could take my baby?" "He could try, with his resources in your situation." He meant my lack of resources, my lack of everything. "It's a possibility you need to prepare for." I left that office feeling hollow. $500,000 in potential weekends with my own child. That was my future if I played by the rules. So I decided to change the rules. Dr. Maggie Williams gave me the name. She wrote it on her prescription pad during my next prenatal appointment after taking my dangerously high blood pressure. Jennifer, this stress is going to kill you or the baby or both, she said. You need real help. She handed me the paper. Robert Thorne, attorney at law, a phone number. He's expensive, Maggie said quietly, but he's the best. He specializes in destroying men exactly like your husband. I called from my car in the parking garage. A secretary answered, professional and cool. I explained who I was, who referred me, what I needed. Mr. Thorne's retainer is $50,000, she said. My heart sank. I have $5,000 in cash. A pause. Hold, please. 30 seconds later, a man's voice came on the line. Deep, measured, controlled. Mrs. Harrison, Dr. Williams speaks very highly of you. Come to my office tomorrow at 2 p.m. Bring your prenuptial agreement and any evidence you've gathered. Robert Thorne's office was nothing like the first lawyer's modern glass box. This was old money, old power, mahogany panels, floor-to-ceiling law books, the smell of leather and expensive cigars. Thorne himself was 58, with silver hair and eyes like a hunting falcon. He wore a three-piece suit that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. When he looked at me, I felt like he could see every secret I'd ever kept. I showed him everything. The prenup, the investigator photos, the credit card statements I'd been secretly documenting. 8 years of household financial records that showed every dollar David spent. Thorne read the prenup in complete silence. 5 minutes became 10, then 15. I sat across from him, 7 months pregnant and terrified, while he absorbed every word. Finally, he looked up. Your husband's lawyers were very thorough. My heart dropped. Then he smiled. It was the smile of a predator who just spotted wounded prey. But they made one critical mistake. He turned to page 63 and showed me Article 12, subsection C. I'd read it a dozen times already, but hearing him explain it in legal terms made it real. This is an old money protection clause, Thorne said, written to prevent wealthy men from squandering family fortunes on mistresses. Your husband's grandfather was old Chicago money. This was his lawyer's standard language, designed to protect heirs from profligate fathers. He pointed to the specific terms. If your husband committed adultery during your pregnancy, and if that adultery involves spending more than $100,000 in marital assets within a 12-month period, and if that spending caused material harm to your unborn child's financial security, then the standard prenup terms are void. I could barely breathe. Completely void. Asset division reverts to Illinois marital law, which is 50-50. You'd be entitled to half of everything, plus primary custody presumption, plus an emergency injunction to prevent him from hiding assets, plus he pays all legal fees. I did the math in my head. David's fortune was approximately $340 million. Half was $170 million. He spent over $200,000 on his mistress in the past year, I said, my voice shaking. I have receipts for every dollar. Thorne's smile widened. Then we have him. But how do we prove it triggered the clause? How do we make it stick? We need him to activate it himself, Thorne said. We need him to sign documents acknowledging the terms and triggering the consequences. And we need to file for the emergency injunction before he realizes what he's done. How? Thorne leaned back in his leather chair, fingers steepled. We create documents that look like standard estate planning, a trust amendment for the baby's protection. We bury the activation language in 47 pages of legal boilerplate. We use his own law firm's letterhead to make it look legitimate, and we get him to sign without reading. He won't read, I said with absolute certainty. He never reads anything I give him. He thinks I'm too stupid to trick him. Good, Thorne said. His arrogance is our weapon. But Mrs. Harrison, if we do this, we have one shot. One. If he discovers the plan before we file the court order, he'll move every asset offshore where we can't touch it. Cayman accounts, Swiss banks, cryptocurrency, it'll vanish. How long do we have? From the moment he signs until we get that judge's order, maybe 72 hours. We'll need to move fast and perfectly. I put my hand on my belly, felt the baby kick. Can you play the obedient wife for 2 more weeks? Thorne asked. I'd been playing the obedient wife for 8 years. 2 more weeks was nothing. Yes, I said. Then let's destroy him. Over the next week, Thorne assembled his team, a forensic accountant named Margaret Flynn, who could track money through labyrinths of shell corporations, a banking specialist named James Ortiz, who knew every offshore haven and how to freeze them, a corporate lawyer named Sarah Chen, who could draft documents that looked legitimate while hiding legal landmines. They worked in a secure office across town, somewhere David would never accidentally see them. I visited every other day, providing more evidence. Credit card statements going back 8 years, LLC formation documents I found in David's office, email receipts for hotels and gifts and romantic weekends. Flynn built a spreadsheet of every dollar David had spent on Amber. The numbers were staggering: $47,000 for jewelry, $35,000 for the bear, $12,000 for shoes, $18,000 for 6 months of car lease payments, $65,000 for a Lake Geneva property he claimed was an investment but was actually their weekend getaway, $28,000 in hotel charges. Total, $205,000, more than double the clause's threshold. Ortiz discovered something even more damning. David had been quietly moving assets for 6 months. $2 million to a Cayman account, $5 million converted to gold bullion stored in a private vault, $8 million in bearer bonds, untraceable and portable. He's planning to divorce you, Thorne said, showing me the evidence. He's been preparing for months. If we wait any longer, it'll all disappear offshore where you can't touch it. How soon can we move? The documents are ready. We just need him to sign. Chen showed me what they'd created. The Harrison Family Trust Amendment, Child Protection Addendum, 47 pages of dense legal language that looked exactly like estate planning documents. Wealthy men sign all the time. Buried on pages 31 through 33 was the activation language for Article 12, subsection C. Buried on pages 38 through 40 was the irrevocable transfer of asset control pending custody determination. The cover letter was on David's own law firm's letterhead. Morton, Cahill, and Wade, the white shoe firm he'd used for 15 years. How did you get their letterhead? I asked. Thorne smiled. A junior partner there owes me a favor. He'll take the fall if this goes wrong. But I paid him well enough not to care. And if David calls his lawyer to verify, it's Friday afternoon. We'll have you deliver these at 3:47 p.m. Most of the partners leave early on Fridays. By the time anyone could verify, it'll be too late. Everything hinged on David's arrogance, on his absolute certainty that I was too stupid, too beaten down, too obedient to ever challenge him. He'll sign, I said with certainty. He thinks I'm furniture. Thorne studied me for a long moment. You're not furniture, Mrs. Harrison. You're the most dangerous thing a man like your husband can face. What's that? An underestimated woman who's done being invisible. Friday came. I dressed carefully that morning. Nothing that screamed defiance, just my usual expensive but modest maternity wear. Soft gray cashmere, pearl earrings, minimal makeup. The perfect corporate wife costume. I placed the documents in a leather portfolio, 47 pages that would either free me or destroy me. At 3:45 p.m., I walked into David's office building, rode the elevator to the 42nd floor, nodded at his assistant, who waved me through without question. I was the wife. Invisible, harmless, expected. David was on the phone when I entered. He held up one finger, the universal gesture for, wait, you're not important enough to interrupt my call. I waited, stood there for 5 minutes while he discussed property leveraging and closing dates with someone who wasn't his 7 months pregnant wife. Finally, he hung up. What is it, Jen? I'm swamped. I placed the portfolio on his desk, opened it with hands that looked steady but felt like they were shaking apart. Your attorney sent these over, said you need to sign before the baby comes. David picked up the cover letter, scanned it without really reading. I watched his eyes skim over the law firm's name, the subject line about child protection, the urgency clause. What is all this? He asked, already bored. Estate planning stuff. For the baby. Make sure everything goes to our child if something happens to you. I kept my voice soft, deferential. Your lawyer said it's standard for men in your position. Protection for the Harrison legacy. The word legacy made his eyes light up. David loved the idea of himself as a patriarch, a dynasty builder. It was pure ego bait, and he swallowed it whole. Right, smart. He picked up his Mont Blanc pen, the one that cost $800, started flipping through the pages. I'd placed yellow sticky tabs on every signature line. Made it as mindless as possible, like signing autographs. He signed page 12 without reading it, signed page 23, flipped to page 31, the big one, the activation of Article 12 that would void his precious prenup. His phone buzzed. A text from Amber. I could see the preview. Can't wait for tonight, baby. David smiled at the message, signed page 31 while looking at his phone. Never read a single word. Page 38, asset control transfer. He signed it while checking his watch, probably calculating when he could leave to meet her. Page 47, final acknowledgement of terms. His signature was a quick / arrogant and careless. Total time, 4 minutes. He pushed the stack back across his desk. There, all set. Anything else? No, I said quietly. That's everything. Thank you. Good, I've got a dinner thing tonight. Don't wait up. A dinner thing. With his mistress. While I sat home alone, 7 months pregnant with his child, having just watched him sign away his empire without knowing it, I gathered the documents, walked out of his office on shaking legs, made it to my car in the parking garage before the adrenaline crash hit. I called Thorne. He signed everything. Get those documents to me immediately. Don't stop. Don't go home. Come straight here. I drove across town, hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel, delivered the documents to Thorne's office at 4:23 p.m. He reviewed every signature. Perfect. We file the emergency motion Monday morning. Judge Morrison owes me several favors. She'll hear us in chambers. We should have the order by Monday afternoon. And until then, you go home and act normal. Don't give him any reason to suspect. Can you do that? I'd been acting normal in a dead marriage for 8 years. I could do it for 3 more days. Yes, I said. But I was wrong about the 3 days. Because that night, everything fell apart. Saturday morning. I woke to David's side of the bed empty, as always. But this time, something felt different. The air in the condo had a charged quality, like the pressure drop before a thunderstorm. I checked my phone. 7 a.m., a text from Thorne sent at 6. Stay calm. Call me when you're alone. My stomach dropped. I went to the bathroom, locked the door, called him. What happened? I whispered. Amber Sinclair checked your husband's credit card statement this morning. She has access to his accounts, apparently. She saw my retainer charge, $50,000 to Thorne and Associates. Oh, God. She Googled my name, found out I'm a divorce attorney. She called David 20 minutes ago. I sat on the bathroom floor, hand on my belly. What did she tell him? Everything. That his wife hired the most aggressive divorce attorney in Chicago. David's probably figuring out what he signed right now. As if summoned by his name, I heard the front door slam. David's voice, loud and furious. Jennifer, get out here. I have to go, I whispered to Thorne. Don't admit anything. Don't apologize. And if he gets violent, document everything. David was in the kitchen when I emerged. His face was red, veins standing out on his neck. He held his phone in one hand and papers in the other, copies of what he'd signed yesterday. You think you're smart, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. You think you can trick me? I said nothing. Fear and adrenaline battled in my chest. I know what you did. The documents, the lawyer, all of it. You're trying to steal from me. I'm not trying to steal anything, I said, keeping my voice level. I'm trying to protect our daughter. Protect her. He laughed, harsh and cruel. You're nothing without me. You understand? Nothing. No money, no shawl, no prospects. You're a parasite who's been living off me for 8 years. I gave up my career for you. You didn't have a career. You had an entry-level accounting job that paid $40,000 a year. I made you. I gave you this life. He stepped closer. I could smell the rage on him, sharp and acidic. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to prove you're mentally unstable, that you're a danger to our child. I'll get full custody, and you'll get nothing. The prenup says you get $500,000 if you're lucky. My lawyers are going to argue you breached it by hiring Thorne. Fraud. Attempted theft. You'll be lucky if you don't end up in prison. He grabbed my arm hard enough to leave marks. You made a big mistake, Jen. The biggest of your life. Then he shoved me, not hard, but enough to make me stumble. I caught myself on the kitchen counter, hand instinctively going to my belly. David was already on his phone. Mom, it's me. I need you to do something. Jen's having some kind of breakdown. She's not thinking clearly. I'm worried about the baby. He was setting me up, positioning me as unstable, irrational, dangerous, laying the groundwork to take my daughter away. I did the only thing I could think of. I went to the bedroom, locked the door, and called Dr. Maggie Williams. Jennifer, what's wrong? He knows. About the lawyer, the documents, everything. Maggie, he pushed me, and he's telling people I'm having a breakdown. Are you hurt? Is the baby okay? I don't know. I'm scared. What do I do? Go to the hospital right now. Get the injury documented, get checked out. I'll meet you there. But when I tried to leave, I found David had taken my car keys, his way of trapping me, of maintaining control. That night, the stress became too much. My body, pushed past its limits, began to shut down. Contractions started at 2 a.m., real ones, not practice, sharp and regular and terrifying. I was only 32 weeks pregnant. Too early. Much too early. I called 911 myself. David was asleep in the guest room, or pretending to be. The ambulance arrived at 2:17 a.m. Neighbors watched from their windows as paramedics loaded me onto a gurney. At the hospital, Dr. Maggie worked to stop the labor. Medication, bed rest, monitors tracking every heartbeat. The baby's distress levels climbed, then stabilized, then climbed again. We need to keep you here, Maggie said. Complete bed rest. Any more stress and this baby comes dangerously premature. David arrived at sunrise, playing the concerned husband for the medical staff. Doctor, is my wife going to be okay? Is the baby safe? They're both stable for now, Maggie said, her voice carefully neutral. But Mrs. Harrison needs to avoid all stress. David nodded solemnly. Then, when Maggie left the room, he leaned close to my bed. See what your games did? You're endangering our child. The doctors will testify to that. He spoke to the nurses on his way out. My wife has been having some paranoid episodes. Saying things that aren't true. If she makes accusations, please let me know. I'm worried about her mental state. I was trapped, literally bedridden, monitored, controlled. And David was using my own medical crisis to paint me as unstable. But the worst part came Sunday at 4 a.m. David left the hospital thinking I was asleep. I wasn't. I watched him go, then checked the financial apps on my phone, the ones that tracked our joint accounts. Money was moving, lots of money. Wire transfer to Cayman Islands, $15 million. Wire transfer to Switzerland, $10 million. Stock sales, $8 million converted to cryptocurrency. He was doing exactly what Thorne had feared, moving assets offshore, beyond the reach of any court order. By the time the courts opened Monday morning, $40 million would be gone. I called Thorne from the bathroom, my voice shaking. He's moving the money, right now, millions of dollars offshore. How much time until the court order? Monday, 10 a.m. at the earliest. That's 30 hours away. He'll have it all hidden by then, Thorne said, his voice grim. We've lost. I sat on the cold bathroom floor and felt everything collapse. The plan, the hope, the chance at freedom. All of it crumbling because I'd been trapped in a hospital bed while David dismantled my future. I'd failed. Failed myself, failed my daughter, failed at the one chance I'd had to escape. I whispered to my baby, I'm so sorry, I tried. I really tried. But someone else had been watching too. Someone David never suspected, his own mother. Sunday, 10 a.m. I was still in the hospital bed, monitors beeping their steady rhythm. The baby had stabilized, but Maggie insisted on continued observation. David was gone, probably moving more money or meeting Amber to celebrate his victory. A knock on the door. I expected a nurse, but it was Diane Harrison, David's mother. 67 years old, silver hair perfectly styled, wearing a Chanel suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. She carried a bouquet of white roses. Her expression was unreadable. Jennifer, she said, may I come in? I nodded, wary. Diane had always been cordial but distant, the kind of mother-in-law who sent birthday cards with checks but never asked about my life. She set the roses on the bedside table, sat in the visitor's chair, studied me with sharp blue eyes that reminded me painfully of David's. My son told me, "You're having a breakdown," she said. My heart sank. She was here to convince me to back down, to protect David, to side with her son against the unstable wife. "I'm not having a breakdown," I said quietly. "I know." She opened her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. "I've been watching him for 3 months. Since you came to me painting the nursery, and I saw the look in your eyes." She handed me the envelope. Inside were photos. David and Amber at restaurants, entering hotels. The same kind of evidence Costa had gathered, but more recent. "You hired an investigator?" I asked, stunned. "Robert Martinez, former FBI, very thorough." Diane pulled out more documents. "I also have bank statements from David's hidden LLC. I'm still listed as an emergency contact from when he first formed the company. He never bothered to remove me." The statement showed every transfer to Amber, every gift, every trip, every dollar spent on the affair. "Why?" I asked. "Why would you do this?" Diane was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was tight with old pain. 1983, I was pregnant with David. 7 months along, just like you. I found a receipt in my husband's jacket pocket, a hotel room downtown. When I confronted him, he admitted to an affair with his secretary. She looked at her hands, perfectly manicured, trembling slightly. She was 24. Beautiful. Ambitious. Everything I wasn't anymore. "What did you do?" "I stayed. He promised it was over, that he'd never do it again." I believed him because I wanted to believe him, because I had a baby coming and no money of my own and a prenup that gave me almost nothing. Diane's voice went flat. "It wasn't over. He kept mistresses for 30 years. Different women, same pattern. I played the perfect wife, raised David, smiled for the cameras, and I died inside piece by piece." She looked at me with eyes that held decades of regret. "When David told me you were pregnant, I hoped he'd be different, better than his father, but he's exactly the same. And I won't watch him do to you and my grandchild what his father did to us." "He's moving money offshore," I said. "By tomorrow, it'll all be gone. Even if we get a court order, there won't be anything left to freeze." "I know, I've been tracking it." Diane pulled out her phone, showed me screenshots. "But I also know something David doesn't. That Cayman account, I'm a signatory. He never removed me when he set it up 5 years ago." "You can access it?" "I can freeze it, not permanently, but long enough to stop the transfers." She pulled out a small recording device. "I also have this. A phone call from yesterday. David talking to Amber about his plans." She pressed play. David's voice filled the quiet hospital room. "Once the baby's born, I'm divorcing her. I'll claim she's mentally unstable, get full custody. You and me, baby. A fresh start. I'm thinking we get married in Amalfi next summer." Amber's voice. "What about your mother?" "She'll babysit, gives us freedom to travel." The recording ended. Diane's face was stone. "He wants me to babysit while he destroys his family, while he takes my grandchild from her mother and plays house with his mistress." She leaned forward. "I'm testifying for you, Jennifer. I'll give the court everything I have. I'll swear under oath that my son is unfit, that he's repeating the pattern that destroyed our family. He's your son, and you're carrying my grandchild. That baby deserves better than what I gave David, better than the cold, calculating man I raised because I was too afraid to leave." She pulled a burner phone from her purse. "Call your lawyer. Tell him we move tomorrow morning. First thing. I'll have the bank statements, the recordings, everything he needs, and I'll freeze that Cayman account at 9 a.m., 1 hour before you file." I took the phone with shaking hands. "Why are you doing this?" Diane stood, smoother, perfect suit. "Because 30 years ago, someone should have helped me, should have told me I didn't have to stay, that I was worth more than a man's convenience. No one did. I'm not letting that happen to you." She paused at the door. "Also, I've met Amber Sinclair. She's shallow, grasping, and utterly unsuitable to be anywhere near my grandchild. I'd rather see my son humbled than watch him marry that woman and inflict her on my family." After she left, I called Thorne from the bathroom. We have a problem, I started. I know about the offshore transfers. We have a solution. David's mother. She has evidence, recordings, and access to freeze his Cayman account. Silence, then. His mother is helping you? She's testifying against him. We have everything we need. Can you get out of that hospital? I looked at the monitors, the IV line, the medical machinery keeping me and the baby safe. Not officially. Then we'll have to do this the unconventional way. I'll have everything ready for an emergency chambers hearing at 8:47 a.m. Can Dr. Williams discharge you against medical advice? She will if I ask. Then that's what we do. Tomorrow morning, 7 a.m., you walk out of that hospital. Diane meets us at the courthouse with her evidence. We present everything to Judge Morrison before David even wakes up. And the money? If Diane can freeze that Cayman account, and we can get Morrison to issue an immediate nationwide freeze order, we might catch most of it. Not all, but enough. I looked at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. 7 months pregnant, hospital gown, dark circles under my eyes. I looked defeated, broken, but I wasn't. Not anymore. Let's do it, I said. Monday morning, 7 a.m. Dr. Maggie Williams appeared in my room with discharge papers. Against medical advice means it's your choice, not mine, she said, filling out the forms. But for the record, I think you should stay. Then she winked. However, I also think some stress is worse than others, and getting justice might be better for your blood pressure than staying trapped in this bed. Diane was waiting in the parking garage with her Mercedes. We drove to the courthouse in tense silence. I watched Chicago wake up around us, the city golden in early autumn light, and felt like I was living in someone else's life. Thorne met us at a side entrance. Judge Morrison is waiting. She cleared her schedule. We have 30 minutes to present everything before her regular docket starts. Judge Patricia Morrison's chambers were all dark wood and legal authority. She was 55, with steel gray hair and a reputation for hating domestic abusers. Thorne had chosen her deliberately. We presented everything. The prenup with Article 12, subsection C highlighted at the end, the $205,000 in expenditure proof, the photos, the receipts, the credit card statements, the documents David had signed activating the clause, Diane's recordings of David planning to take the baby and marry his mistress. Morrison listened without interruption. When we finished, she studied the evidence for what felt like an eternity. Finally, she looked up. This man spent over $200,000 on his mistress while his wife was pregnant, then tried to hide his assets when she discovered the affair, then attempted to paint her as mentally unstable to gain custody. Yes, Your Honor, Thorne said. And his own mother is testifying against him? Diane spoke for the first time. I won't let my son destroy this woman and my grandchild the way my husband destroyed me. Morrison's expression hardened. Emergency injunction granted. All asset transfers as of Friday, 3:47 p.m. are frozen. All subsequent transfers are void and must be returned. Petitioner is granted temporary emergency control of marital assets pending full custody hearing. She looked at me. Mrs. Harrison, you'll retain primary physical custody of the child. Mr. Harrison will have supervised visitation only, pending psychological evaluation. The gavel came down. Bang. The sound of my life changing. Timestamp, 10:47 a.m. Thorne's team immediately transmitted the order electronically. Every bank, every brokerage, every financial institution that held David Harrison's money received notice within minutes. All accounts frozen, all credit cards declined, and all transfers reversed. Diane made a phone call to the Cayman Bank. As a signatory, she ordered an immediate freeze on all activity. The bank had no choice but to comply. It's done, Thorne said. The $15 million he moved to Cayman is frozen. The Swiss account is frozen. The cryptocurrency exchange is reversing the transactions. How much did we save? I asked. We won't know the final numbers for a few days, but probably 80% of his liquid assets. The rest he managed to move too fast or into vehicles we can't track. But it's enough. More than enough. I sat in the courthouse hallway, one hand on my belly, and felt the enormity of it settle over me. I'd done it. Against all odds, against David's money and power and certainty, that I was too weak to fight back. I'd actually done it. What happens now? I asked. Now, Thorne said, we wait for him to realize what happened. We didn't have to wait long. Monday evening, 6:47 p.m. David Harrison sat in a private dining room at Chicago's most exclusive steakhouse. The room glowed with amber light in old money elegance. Across from him, Amber Sinclair wore a blood-red dress that plunged almost to her navel. David was confident, triumphant. He'd moved $40 million offshore over the weekend. By his calculations, even if Jen's lawyer somehow got a court order, there'd be nothing left to freeze. He'd won. To our future, baby, he said, raising a bottle of Dom Perignon Rosé. $500 worth of champagne caught the candlelight. In 2 weeks, I'm filing for divorce. Then it's just you and me. Amber smiled, predatory and pleased. Finally. When are you leaving her? Next month. I've already got the divorce papers drawn up. She's got nothing. I made sure of it. They clinked glasses. The sound rang out like a death knell for everything he thought he owned. The appetizers arrived. Oysters on ice, each one costing more than what some people made in an hour. David and Amber laughed, planned their future, discussed wedding destinations. I'm thinking Amalfi Coast, David said, imagining himself as a patriarch starting fresh. Tahiti, Amber countered, more exclusive. His phone buzzed, once, twice, 5 times. He ignored it. Probably just work, last-minute questions from the Tokyo office. The phone kept buzzing. At 7 p.m., the waiter approached their table. He looked uncomfortable. Mr. Harrison, I'm very sorry, but there seems to be an issue with your card. David looked up, annoyed. What kind of issue? It was declined, sir. David laughed, actually laughed. That's impossible. Run it again. The waiter disappeared, returned 3 minutes later. We've run it 3 times, sir. Perhaps you have another card? Other diners were starting to notice. Amber's expression shifted from adoration to concern. David pulled out his American Express Centurion card, the legendary black card that supposedly had no limit, handed it over with supreme confidence. The waiter returned, even more uncomfortable. This one was also declined, sir. David tried his Visa. Declined. His corporate card. Declined. Every piece of plastic in his wallet came back refused. Amber stood up, her voice rising. What's going on, David? It's a mistake, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Some kind of bank error. He finally checked his phone. 23 missed calls. Voicemails from his lawyer, his bank, his business partner, Paul Brennan. The first voicemail was from his attorney. David, call me immediately. There's an emergency court order. Your accounts are frozen. I don't know how this happened, but you need to call me right now. The second was from his bank. Mr. Harrison, we've received a federal court order freezing all your accounts effective 10:47 a.m. today. All credit cards and debit cards have been deactivated. Please contact us immediately. The third was from Paul Brennan. What the fuck did you do? I'm locked out of the company accounts. The board got a notice that you're under some kind of legal action. Call me. David's face drained of color. He looked at Amber, who was staring at him with dawning horror. Your wife, she said, your pregnant wife. What did she do? She couldn't have. Are you telling me you're broke? Amber's voice carried across the quiet restaurant. Other diners turned to stare. You told me she was taken care of. You said she'd get nothing. Baby, just give me a minute to figure this out. Amber picked up her champagne glass. For one suspended moment, David thought she might toast to working it out together. Instead, she threw the champagne in his face. $500 worth of Dom Perignon Rosé dripped down his $3,000 suit. The entire restaurant watched in stunned silence. I don't date poor men, Amber said clearly. Then she grabbed her Birkin bag, the one he'd bought her for $35,000, and walked out. David sat there, champagne dripping from his hair, while dozens of Chicago's elite watched his humiliation. Someone whispered. Someone else laughed quietly. He threw cash on the table, all he had in his wallet, and fled. Outside, he tried to call his driver. The corporate car service was tied to the frozen account. He had to hail a regular taxi like a common person. Gold Coast, he told the driver. The Pinnacle building. When they arrived at his building, the doorman stepped forward to block his path. I'm sorry, Mr. Harrison, I can't let you up. What? I live here. New primary resident protocols as of 10:47 a.m. today. Sir, Mrs. Harrison's orders. I own this building. The doorman handed him an envelope. I was asked to give you this. David tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of cream-colored stationery in Jen's handwriting. He read it standing on the sidewalk where he'd lived for 8 years, unable to enter his own home. The letter detailed everything: the court order, the frozen accounts, the reverse transfers, his mother's testimony, the clause in the prenup he'd signed and activated himself. The final paragraph gutted him. You called our baby good timing and tax benefits. You were right. This pregnancy had perfect timing. The benefits? Everything you thought you owned. You taught me love is transactional. Congratulations. You just lost the negotiation. David looked up at the building, his building, and saw lights on in what used to be his condo. Saw a silhouette in the window, Jen looking down at him. She didn't wave, didn't gesture, just looked at him for a long moment, then closed the curtains. He was locked out, broke, humiliated, destroyed by the woman he'd considered furniture. He checked his phone. Amber had already blocked his number. His business partner had sent a text. Emergency board meeting tomorrow. They're voting to remove you as CEO. His lawyer, we need to talk about bankruptcy options. His mother, you did this to yourself. David Harrison stood on the sidewalk in his champagne-stained suit and realized he'd lost everything. His money, his company, his mistress, his mother, his home, his wife, his child. He'd underestimated the quiet woman who managed his household, and she'd managed him right out of his own life. 2 months later, I went into labor at 4:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. The contractions started gently, then built into waves of pressure that took my breath away. I called Dr. Maggie Williams, who told me to come to the hospital immediately. Diane drove me. She'd been staying in the guest room for the past 2 months, helping me prepare for the baby. We'd become unexpectedly close, united by our shared experience of loving and leaving Harrison men. Breathe, Diane said as another contraction hit, just like we practiced. At the hospital, Maggie was waiting. She got me into a delivery room, checked my progress. You're at 7 centimeters. This baby's coming fast. Labor was pain and pressure and primal intensity. But through it all, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Power, control, the knowledge that I was bringing my daughter into a world where I could protect her. At 7:41 a.m., after 3 hours of labor, Grace Diane Harrison entered the world. 7 pounds, 3 ounces. Perfect. Beautiful. Mine. She has his hair, Diane said, tears streaming down her face. Dark like David's. I held my daughter and felt a fierce, overwhelming love. But she'll have my strength, I said. Through the window, I saw a car in the parking lot, David's Mercedes. He was there in the parking lot, prevented by restraining order from coming inside. Diane saw him too. She walked to the window, looked down at her son sitting in his car, and mouthed words I couldn't hear but could imagine. You did this to yourself. Then she closed the blinds. David didn't get to meet his daughter that day, or the next week, or the month after that. The custody order was clear: supervised visitation only, starting when Grace turned 2 years old, pending his completion of anger management and parenting classes. By the time she was 6 months old, he'd missed every milestone. Her first smile, her first laugh, the way she gripped my finger with her tiny hand. The final financial accounting came through 3 months after Grace was born. Of David's $340 million in assets, I received control of $290 million. The rest he'd managed to move into untraceable vehicles before the freeze, or it was tied up in complex offshore structures that would take years to unravel. But $290 million was more than enough. I started a consulting firm teaching women financial literacy. Check Your Prenup seminars spread across Chicago, then nationwide. Women who'd signed documents without reading them, who'd trusted men to handle the money, who'd made themselves vulnerable because they thought love was enough. I taught them what I'd learned: that love without financial independence is just another form of captivity, that contracts matter, that you can love someone and still protect yourself. Forbes ran a profile on me. How one woman turned betrayal into empire. The article detailed my story, though names were changed to protect Grace's privacy. It went viral. I received thousands of messages from women in similar situations. Trapped in marriages with men who controlled the money, isolated by prenups they'd signed without reading, too scared to leave because they had children and no resources. I helped as many as I could, funded legal aid for women fighting custody battles, created a network of attorneys specializing in hidden asset discovery, built a database of prenuptial clauses that could be used as weapons against the men who drafted them. David, meanwhile, fell far and fast. The board of Harrison Properties voted to remove him as CEO. Paul Brennan took over, bought David's shares at a steep discount as part of the settlement. David fought it, but with no money for lawyers, he had no leverage. He moved to a studio apartment in Wicker Park, got a job in middle management at a competitor's firm. Paul had given him the position out of pity, paying him $120,000 a year. It was more than most people made, but for a man who'd once controlled hundreds of millions, it was poverty. Every month, his paycheck was garnished for child support, $8,000 court-ordered. He paid it because he had no choice, but I saw the bitterness in his face during the few supervised visitation sessions he actually showed up for. Amber Sinclair married a different billionaire within 6 months, posted wedding photos from Tahiti, her dream destination. David wasn't mentioned or remembered. 1 year after Grace's birth, I threw a party. Diane, Dr. Maggie, Robert Thorne, Paul Brennan, and a few close friends. We celebrated Grace's first birthday in the condo that was now legally mine. The doorbell rang during cake. A courier with legal documents. David's final custody appeal. Denied. Child support increased to $10,000 per month based on his new salary. Visitation, supervised only, every other Sunday at a neutral location. Legal fees, David owed me $340,000 to be paid over 10 years. I signed the acknowledgement and returned to the party. Grace was covered in frosting, giggling as Diane wiped her face. My daughter would never know poverty, never know powerlessness, never be trapped the way I had been. That night, after everyone left, I carried Grace to the nursery I'd painted yellow. The nursery David had never helped with, had never cared about. On the wall hung a frame containing page 63 of our prenuptial agreement. Article 12, subsection C, highlighted in yellow. The clause that had freed us. I rocked Grace to sleep and whispered the story I'd tell her someday. Your father called you tax benefits. He called me furniture. He thought we were possessions he owned. He learned we were his reckoning. Grace slept, peaceful and safe. Outside the window, Chicago glittered in the night. My city now, my life, my future built from the ruins of his arrogance. I'd been invisible for 8 years, underestimated, dismissed, controlled. But I'd learned something David never understood. The most dangerous person in any room is the one no one's paying attention to. The one who's been quietly watching, learning, planning. The one who knows that sometimes the best revenge isn't loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's just signing your name on the right piece of paper and watching everything burn. 6 months after Grace's first birthday, David requested a meeting, not for visitation, which he'd been attending sporadically at best. This was different, official, through lawyers. He wants to negotiate, Thorne told me over the phone. Says he's willing to relinquish all parental rights in exchange for reduction of child support obligations. I sat in my home office, Grace napping in the next room, and felt cold rage settle over me. He wants to buy his way out of being a father. Essentially, yes. He's claiming the current support amount is financially devastating. He wants it reduced to $2,000 a month, and in exchange, he'll sign away all custody rights. $2,000 a month for a man making $10,000 a month wasn't devastating. It was inconvenient. He wanted more money for himself and was willing to abandon his daughter to get it. What do you think I should do? I asked. Thorne was quiet for a moment. That's not a legal question, Jennifer. That's a question only you can answer. I thought about Grace, 16 months old, just starting to walk. She had David's dark hair and my green eyes. She laughed easily, loved books, and had never known her father beyond awkward supervised visits where he checked his phone and counted down the minutes. Would she be better off without those visits? Without the father who saw her as an obligation? Set up the meeting, I said, but I want it in person. No lawyers. just him and me. We met in a conference room at Thorne's office, neutral territory. Thorne and David's court-appointed lawyer waited outside, giving us privacy but staying close enough to formalize whatever we decided. David looked different, older. He'd lost weight, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 2 years ago. His suit was nice but not custom, and I noticed the watch on his wrist was a Seiko, not the Rolex he used to wear. "Jen," he said when I entered. "David." We sat across from each other at the polished conference table. Through the window, I could see Lake Michigan stretching gray and cold toward the horizon. "Thank you for meeting me, Jen," he said. His voice lacked the arrogance I remembered. He sounded tired. "You want to give up your daughter for $6,000 a month." "That's not how I'd phrase it." "How would you phrase it?" He sighed. "I can't afford the support payments. Between that and the legal fees I owe you, I'm barely surviving. I had to sell my car, move to a smaller apartment. I can't build any kind of life." "You built this life, David. Every choice that led here was yours." "You destroyed me." "No, you destroyed yourself. I just documented it." He looked away, jaws tight. "I made mistakes. I know that. But Grace doesn't need a father who resents her every time he writes a support check. She deserves better. She deserves a father who loves her. I don't know how to be that person." His voice cracked slightly. "I look at her and I see everything I lost. I see you and the life I thought I'd have with Amber and the company I built. I see failure. So you want to walk away. I want to give her the chance to have a real father someday. Someone who isn't broken." I studied him. The man I'd married at 25 had been confident, charismatic, full of ambition. This man was hollow, defeated. Part of me felt satisfaction. He'd underestimated me and paid the price. But another part, the part that still remembered loving him once, felt something like pity. "If I agree to this," I said slowly, "you never contact Grace. Ever. You don't show up when she's 5 or 10 or 18 wanting to reconnect. You don't send birthday cards or Christmas presents. You're gone completely." "I understand." "And the child support reduction? I'll agree to $2,000 a month. But the legal fees you owe me, those don't change. You pay every dollar." He nodded. "That's fair. And one more thing." I leaned forward. "You attend 10 sessions with a therapist specializing in narcissistic personality patterns. You learn why you became the kind of man who could betray his pregnant wife. You understand what you did. Why, if I'm giving up my rights, why does my therapy matter to you? Because someday Grace will ask about you, and I want to be able to tell her that at the end, you tried to be better. Even if you couldn't be her father, you tried to understand why." David was quiet for a long moment. "Okay, 10 sessions. And David, if you ever break this agreement, if you ever try to contact Grace or claim you want a relationship after all, the original custody order stands. Full child support, supervised visitation, all of it. This is your one chance to walk away cleanly." "I understand." We called the lawyers in, spent 3 hours working through the legal language. By 4 p.m., it was done. David signed away all parental rights. I signed the agreement reducing his support obligations. As he was leaving, he paused at the door. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry for all of it." "Are you sorry you did it, or sorry you got caught?" He thought about that. "I don't know. Maybe both." "That's the most honest thing you've said in years." After he left, I sat in the conference room for a long time. Grace would grow up without a father, but she'd grow up free. Free from a man who saw her as an obligation, who couldn't love her without resenting what she represented. Was it the right choice? I didn't know. Maybe I'd wonder for the rest of my life, but I knew this. I'd given her something more valuable than a reluctant father. I'd given her the example of a mother who refused to be invisible, who fought for her rights and won. That night, I held Grace before bed and told her a simplified version of the truth. "Your daddy can't be with us anymore. But that doesn't mean you're not loved. You have me, you have Grandma Diane, you have a whole world of people who think you're amazing." Grace babbled something that might have been "mama" and grabbed my nose. I rocked her to sleep, singing softly. And I didn't cry. Not for David, Not for the marriage that had died, not for the father Grace would never know. I'd already mourned all of that. Now was the time for building something new. 5 years after my divorce, I stood in a conference room at Northwestern University, looking out at 200 women. Grace was in kindergarten, thriving. Diane had moved into a condo 2 floors below mine. The doting grandmother who picked Grace up from school and taught her to bake cookies. My consulting firm had grown from a one-woman operation into a nationwide organization with 18 employees, an office in 4 cities. Today's seminar was titled Financial Literacy and Prenuptial Agreements, Protecting Yourself in Marriage. How many of you signed a prenup? I asked the audience. About half the hands went up. How many of you read every word before signing? Most of the hands went down. Maybe 20 women kept their hands raised. That's what I thought. I didn't read mine either. I was 25 and in love and certain that reading the fine print would insult my fiancé, that it would suggest I didn't trust him. I pulled up a slide showing the prenup's cover page, names redacted but the structure visible. This document controlled 8 years of my life. It was designed to leave me with almost nothing if the marriage ended, and I signed it without reading because I thought love was enough protection. I advanced to the next slide. Article 12, subsection C. But buried in page 63 was a clause that saved me, an infidelity forfeiture provision that voided the entire agreement if my husband cheated during my pregnancy and spent marital assets on his mistress. The room was silent, 200 women leaning forward, absorbing every word. I'm not telling you this story to make you cynical about marriage. I'm telling you because knowledge is power. Because understanding the legal documents you sign is a form of self-protection that has nothing to do with love and everything to do with survival. After the seminar, women lined up to talk to me. Their stories were eerily similar. Men who controlled the finances, prenups signed under pressure, marriages where money equaled power equaled control. One woman, maybe 30, pregnant and desperate, grabbed my hands. My husband tracks every dollar I spend. I can't even buy groceries without him questioning the receipts. And we have a prenup that gives me $10,000 if we divorce. I have no family, no degree, nothing. What do I do? I gave her the card of a lawyer in my network, explained about financial abuse documentation, hidden asset searches, how to build a case quietly while appearing compliant. You can do this, I told her. It feels impossible now, but you're stronger than you know. She left crying, but with hope in her eyes. I watched her go and thought about the woman I'd been. Trapped, scared, certain I had no options. I'd found options by reading the fine print, by using David's own arrogance against him, by refusing to stay invisible. That night, I picked Grace up from Diane's condo. My daughter ran to me, gap-toothed, smile huge, backpack bouncing. "Mommy, I learned about numbers today. Want to hear?" She counted to 50, stumbling a bit around the 30s, but pushing through with determination. So much like me, so unlike the father she'd never known. "That's amazing, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you. Grandma says I'm smart like you." "You're smart like you, all on your own." At home, while Grace colored at the kitchen table, my phone buzzed. An email from Forbes. They were doing a follow-up piece on women who'd built empires from adversity. They wanted to feature me again. I thought about it. Grace was 5 now, old enough to have classmates whose parents might recognize the story, old enough to hear whispers about her mother and father. Was it worth it? The exposure, the inspiration for other women versus Grace's privacy? I typed a response. "I'll do it on one condition. My daughter's name and photo remain private. This is my story, not hers. She gets to write her own story." They agreed. The article ran 2 months later. The prenup clause that changed everything, 5 years later. It detailed my firm's growth, the women we'd helped, the legal precedents we'd set. But mostly it talked about the shift in how women approached marriage contracts. More women reading every clause, more lawyers adding infidelity provisions, more awareness that love and legal protection weren't mutually exclusive. David's name wasn't mentioned, per our agreement. He was just her ex-husband, a real estate developer who underestimated his wife. I heard through the legal grapevine that he'd remarried. A woman named Patricia, a middle school teacher who made $40,000 a year. They had a small wedding in her parents' backyard. Part of me hoped he'd learn something. That therapy and consequences had made him capable of treating this woman better than he'd treated me. But mostly, I didn't think about him at all. My life was full of more important things. Grace's parent-teacher conferences, my company's expansion into Europe, the foundation I'd started to provide free legal aid for women leaving abusive marriages. One evening, while I was working late in my home office, Grace appeared in the doorway in her pajamas. "Mommy, can I ask you something?" "Of course, baby. What is it?" "Emma at school says everyone has a daddy. I told her I'd just have you and Grandma Diane. She says that's weird." My heart clenched. We'd had versions of this conversation before, but it never got easier. "Come here." I patted my lap. Grace climbed up, all bony knees and sweet little girl smell of strawberry shampoo. "Some families have a mommy and a daddy. Some have two mommies or two daddies. Some have just a mommy or just a daddy. Some have grandparents or aunts or uncles raising them. There are lots of different kinds of families. But where's my daddy? Your daddy wasn't able to be part of our family. It wasn't because of you. You didn't do anything wrong. He just couldn't be the kind of father you deserved. Does he know about me? He knows you exist, but he made a choice a long time ago not to be part of your life." Grace was quiet, processing. "Is he sad about it?" "I think he might be, but it was still his choice." "Do you miss him?" I thought about that, about the man I'd married versus the man he'd become. I missed the person I thought he was, but that person wasn't real. So no, I don't miss the real him. "I don't miss him either," Grace said matter-of-factly, "because I never met him. You can't miss someone you never knew, right?" "That's very wise, sweetheart. Mommy, when I grow up, can I help people like you do? You can do anything you want. Be anything you want. That's the whole point." After I tucked Grace into bed, I stood in her doorway watching her sleep. She looked so peaceful, so secure. She'd never know the fear I'd felt, trapped and powerless. She'd grow up knowing that women could fight back, could win, could build empires from their own strength. That was my real legacy. Not the money, not the company, not the Forbes profiles. My legacy was this little girl who would grow up believing she was enough all by herself. 10 years after my divorce, I received an unexpected email. It was from Patricia Harrison, David's second wife. The subject line read, "I need help." My finger hovered over the delete button. I owed David nothing, and by extension, I owed his new wife nothing. Whatever was happening in their marriage was not my problem. But curiosity won. I opened it. "Mrs. Parker Harrison, my name is Patricia Harrison. I'm married to your ex-husband, David. I found your Forbes profile while searching for information about prenuptial agreements. I'm writing because I'm in trouble, and I don't know where else to turn. I signed a prenup before our marriage. I didn't read it carefully. Now I'm pregnant, and I found text messages on David's phone that suggest he's having an affair. This feels familiar, doesn't it? I know it's a lot to ask, but would you be willing to talk to me? Just 20 minutes. Please, Patricia." I stared at the email for a long time. David had done it again, found another woman, married her, gotten her pregnant, and started cheating. The pattern was so predictable, it was almost boring. I could ignore this, let Patricia figure it out herself. David wasn't my problem anymore. But then I thought about the woman who'd grabbed my hands at the seminar 5 years ago, about the thousands of messages I'd received from women trapped in similar situations, about the promise I'd made to help when I could. I replied, "Patricia, I'll meet with you. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. at my office. Bring your prenup and any evidence you have. And Patricia, you're going to be okay. I promise. Jennifer." The next day, Patricia Harrison sat in my conference room. She was 38, the same age I'd been when everything fell apart. Soft-spoken, a middle school teacher, 6 months pregnant. She handed me her prenup with shaking hands. I read it. David had learned nothing. The terms were almost identical to what I'd signed. Years 0 through 5, $50,000. After that, minimal increases. His assets protected, her future disposable. But I flipped to the back pages, looking for what I knew would be there. And there it was. Article 14, subsection B. The same infidelity forfeiture clause his grandfather's lawyers had written decades ago. The clause David had signed without reading again. "Do you have proof of the affair?" I asked. Patricia showed me text messages, credit card statements, hotel receipts. David had gotten sloppy, or maybe he'd never learned to be careful. I called Robert Thorne. He was semi-retired now, but he agreed to take the case. "For old time's sake," he said. But really, I think he enjoyed the symmetry. The same man, the same mistakes, the same reckoning. 3 months later, Patricia filed for divorce. The same clause that had saved me saved her. David lost half his assets again, what little he'd managed to rebuild. This time, there was no public champagne throwing. Patricia handled it quietly, efficiently. She moved to Minnesota to be near her family, had her baby surrounded by people who loved her. David, now 53, was truly broken. 2 divorces, 2 fortunes lost, 2 children he'd never be a father to. He moved to a small town in Indiana, took a job in property management, essentially disappeared. I heard about it through Thorne, who heard about it through Patricia's lawyer. I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not pity, just a distant acknowledgement that some people never learn. Grace, now 15, was thriving. Straight-A student, debate team captain, already talking about Harvard for college. She knew the basics of her origin story, that her father had been incapable of being a good parent, so I'd raised her alone. She'd never asked to meet him, never expressed curiosity. She had her life, her friends, her ambitions. David was irrelevant. One evening, I found her in my home office reading the Forbes profile from 10 years ago. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you regret marrying him, my father?" I thought about that question carefully. I regret how he treated me. I regret the years I spent feeling invisible. But if I hadn't married him, I wouldn't have you. So no, I don't regret it. Every terrible thing that happened led me to you. That's kind of beautiful and kind of sad at the same time. Most of life is like that, sweetheart. Beautiful and sad at once. Grace pulled out a folder from her backpack. We had to write about a personal hero for English class. I wrote about you. She handed me the essay. I read it, tears building in my eyes. My mother is my hero not because she's perfect, but because she's strong. When she found out she was pregnant with me, she also found out her husband was cheating on her. She had no job, no money, and a legal document that said she'd get almost nothing if she left. Most people would have given up. My mother didn't give up. She read every page of that legal document and found a way to protect both of us. She used her intelligence and courage to build a new life. Now she helps other women do the same thing. She taught me that being underestimated can be a superpower, that being quiet doesn't mean being weak, that sometimes the best way to fight is to be smarter than everyone expects. She didn't just survive, she won. And then she helped hundreds of other women win too. That's my hero, that's my mom. I hugged her tight, this incredible young woman I'd brought into the world during the worst time of my life and the best decision I'd ever made. "I'm so proud of you," I whispered. "I'm proud of you too, Mom. You are kind of a badass." That night, after Grace went to bed, I stood in my office looking at the framed prenup page on the wall. Article 12, subsection C, the clause that had changed everything. I thought about the journey, from invisible wife to single mother to CEO to educator, from powerless to powerful, from underestimated to undeniable. David had taught me something valuable, though not in the way he'd intended. He'd taught me that the most dangerous person in any negotiation is the one no one's paying attention to, the one who's watching, learning, planning in silence. He'd underestimated me because I was quiet, because I managed his household efficiently and didn't challenge him, because I signed documents without reading them and seemed content to be decorative. He'd never imagined that quiet could be strategic, that I was reading everything, absorbing everything, waiting for the right moment. And when that moment came, I'd used his own weapon against him. The prenup he'd insisted on, the clause his lawyers had written to protect his legacy, the arrogance that made him sign documents without reading them. I'd turned his power into my freedom. Now, 20 years later, I looked at my life. At Grace, brilliant and fierce. At my company, helping women across the country. At the legal precedents we'd set, the lives we'd changed. I'd started with nothing but a pregnancy and a prenup and a choice to fight. I'd built an empire. Not of money, though there was plenty of that. An empire of strength, of women who refused to be invisible, of daughters who grew up knowing they were enough. David Harrison had tried to erase me from his life. Instead, I'd erased him from mine, and I taught my daughter the most important lesson I'd ever learned. Never underestimate a woman with nothing left to lose, because she has everything to gain.